I'm going to ask you to find your seats again, please. So. Thank you so much for cutting your conversation short. And we did take a picture because this has turned into the Dr. Keisha Ray hour. With so many people standing in line to speak with her, and that's important. There is there's so many reasons to talk about slavery, and health is certainly one of them, because a lot of decisions were made that persist. And as Clint Smith, who is on the bibliography list, because he's written a wonderful book on how the story is passed, and he has something that he said that I want to read. He said, "The legacy of slavery still shapes our cities, roads, and stories today." He says that understanding our history will help us make sense of our world and fighting for a better one. And that's the kind of information that I sense the energy in this room is generating. I have one more quote that I'm going to read before I introduce our next speaker. And she's almost the reason that I have this particular quote. This one's, and you know, everybody should remember this one, especially our students. Nothing will work if you don't. And I read that because the reason this conference is working, because this woman works. Her name is Michelle Cuellar Everidge. She is the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer here at the Witte Museum. Michelle charts a path for the future of the Witte Museum through strategic and interpretive planning. You're seeing the fruits of her labors. Also, she curates the visitor experience, fund development, and community engagement. She is the project director for public history projects focused on telling untold stories of Texas, including the Black Cowboy and American Story, and the upcoming We Are Texas Origin Stories. Dr. Everidge is committed to building an inclusive future for museums across the country and has collaborated with the National Museum of American Latino, the Smithsonian's Our Shared Future, Reckoning with Our Racial Past initiative, and the Texas Association of Museums. She serves as on the executive committee for the Texas Association of Museums. She received her PhD in history from the University of Delaware and intends to go back to her manuscript, Home Away from Home, Federal Domesticity for Displaced Families, eventually. I would like to give a warm welcome, because a lot of what you are benefiting from today is because of the dedicated, committed work of Dr. Everidge. I am definitely in her debt, and I am grateful for her work ethic and for her commitment to the museum and to this project. Please welcome Dr. Michelle Everidge.
I'll tell you first that I will follow this woman anywhere. Thank you, Aranetta, for your leadership and your guidance and your encouragement and your excellence in this process. It has been inspiring to be so close with you as we've worked on this conference. Good morning. As I started to construct a synthesis of what we've learned so far, I was overwhelmed with gratitude for the very generous scholars and teachers and artists who shared their work yesterday and will continue to share their work today. I'm also deeply grateful for you all as learners and as listeners and as participants. I think I share this with everyone, there was this palpable feeling of community in these rooms yesterday, and an openness and a curiosity, an energy of support. It's exactly why we were so committed to this conference and offering a platform and a space for these conversations. I could not have created a synthesis as of 9 o'clock last night without the help of Ron Davis, who is somewhere. I found myself so immersed in what I was learning yesterday that I forgot to get up and go to the other sessions. So thankfully, Ron and I went to opposite sessions, and he sent me a ton of voice notes yesterday to help me construct this. So thanks, Ron. I did that because the YouTube videos that we will create for these sessions and that we will post are not ready yet. I've been asked a few times, especially since the first week in November, whether the Witte as an organization or the planning team or the donors and the sponsors of this conference have received any pushback for hosting a conference on slavery in Texas. The Witte team was asked the same question after Black Cowboys opened in 2021 and when it reopened here in 2024. And the answer today, as it was then, is no. One of our core values as an institution is to create a safe haven for dialogue, and one of the ways that we accomplish this is by presenting evidence through primary sources, artifacts, and specimens from millions of years ago to the present. There is no denying the mountains of evidence we heard yesterday. We heard evidence that demonstrates that slavery was foundational to the Texas economy, a claim we made in the concept statement for this conference. We've seen the numbers, the letters, the laws, the documents, the paintings, the poems, the songs, the stories, the built environment, the material culture, the legacies, the values, the artifacts, and the bodies that together are irrefutable. When Dr. Berry opened the conference yesterday, she said that slavery in Texas was as complex and large as the state itself, and that differences in Texas slavery were as vast and varied as the Texas landscape. In the Texas Wild Gallery that you've walked through, and hopefully you've been able to explore, you can walk through Texas's 8 ecoregions and see how the land, sky, and water of Texas has shaped the flora and fauna you find in those areas. Texas, as we know, is huge. Everything's bigger in Texas, that whole adage. When you make it from one end of the state to another, you can see by the changes in the landscape that life in these disparate areas must also be different. The word that keeps coming to the top of my mind after what we heard yesterday is expansive. Slavery in Texas is expansive in its variety, geography, in its scope, in its chronology, and its significance to the economic, political, social, and cultural histories of the state. And the study of slavery, likewise, is expansive in its source material, in its storytellers, and in the depth and richness being uncovered about the lives of the enslaved. I hope the evidence that you heard yesterday expanded your view of slavery in Texas. Dr. Berry laid out for us the different eras of slavery as the land we call Texas changed shape and politics. Dr. De La Teja as well traced the origins of slavery in Texas back to the mid-13th century, and that slavery was already embedded in Spanish society and law. He noted that Columbus considered enslavement part of the economies of the voyages, and when he brought back indigenous people from the Americas to Spain, there were already markets in place. From the 1500s in the Americas, we spanned more than 500 years of history yesterday to learn from the deeply entrenched legacies of slavery. We heard about them this morning from Dr. Keisha Ray. We've heard about them from Dr. Jermaine Thibodeau and how they shaped the prison system in Texas. And as Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson shared, the white supremacy the Black Americans refuse today through revolution, protection, force, flight, and joy. Dr. Nakia Parker expanded our view of enslaved life in Texas by sharing that indigenous people enslaved thousands, that slavery and captive taking was a long-standing part of the practices of indigenous cultures, but that American slavery collided with their traditional practices in the Southeast United States, and that by the 1700s, indigenous people were enslavers just like the white Americans that pushed them into Indian territory. Her study reveals a mind-blowing aspect to the expansion of slavery, which is that the dispossession of the native tribes of the southern United States, a dispossession, I'll add, that was based on the same one-drop rule understanding of race at the time that contributed to the commitment to racial slavery. That Trail of Tears as we know it was also the successful expansion of slavery to the West. These ideas are completely intertwined. In her study of freedom seekers who fled south to Mexico in pursuit of their freedom, Dr. Michaela Audane underscored that the variability of the landscape meant that freedom seekers faced difficult obstacles as they fled from piney wood forests to brush country. The challenges of navigating the topography of Texas meant that a freedom seeker could flee their life in bondage and make it all the way to the Rio Grande, but because of lack of food, could run out of energy to cross. We heard from Dr. Thibodeau that the types of crops mattered, that cotton may have been king, but that it was queen sugar that opened the doors to what he calls an agro-carceral landscape. Sugar work was hard, dangerous, undesirable. Cane work, he said, built a roadmap for organizing the prison system that would continue to look just like slavery. Dr. Shelton shared that slavery looked different in an urban context, that slavers used the close proximity of the city landscape to enact strict laws and punishments. The team from SACAM revealed those laws in the city of San Antonio and the ways they restricted the movement and behavior of enslaved people. They have an amazing QR code that lists all those ordinances, and they are always happy to share their information. Slavery in and around urban areas also meant that wealth was created on the backs of enslaved people. SACAM leaders shared that 20 out of the first 23 mayors of San Antonio were enslavers. Dr. Shelton also found that enslaved people in cities found opportunities to live out and away from their observation, that they gathered for dances and swimming and races along the beach. He found evidence of integration between Black enslaved people and immigrant whites from Germany, who often were thrown together in the same type of work environments. Ron Davis showed us that evidence of Black Cowboys in the WPA slave narratives that revealed that enslaved cowboys performed all the types of labor necessary to care for livestock and cattle. I was struck yesterday with the number of different types of labor that enslaved people performed. I heard about farm labor, ranch labor, cowboys, dock work, construction work, master builders, masons, carpenters, craftspeople, artisans, potters. I heard a lot about domestic labor, which meant everything from cleaning to emotional and aesthetic labor of running a household, to enslaved mothers feeding white children with their bodies. I heard about sexual labor, both in the terms of sex work and also in the reproduction of more generations of enslaved people. Dr. Whitney Stewart told us the unforgettable story of Rachel, who for 10 years was the woman or mistress of what is now called the Varner Hogg Plantation. She shares that Rachel's intellect and aesthetic taste are all over the plantation house, since she purchased goods and lived together with Columbus Patton in closeness and intimacy, sharing space, furniture, time, and creating her own life. To me, Dr. Stewart's example of Rachel was an embodiment of what Dr. Carter Jackson shared about the differences between happiness and joy. Was Rachel happy being enslaved? No. Did she find joy in building a home? Yes. The intellectual and artistic labor of slavery leads us to Paula King Harper, who highlighted the H. Wilson Company, who were innovators in pottery, developing new handles that could make carrying and transporting these heavy loads easier, so that the handles would not break off. We have some Hiram Wilson pieces over here. These artifacts are also over here for your viewing. Please do take a look. Hiram Wilson and his collaborators were innovators, but also community leaders who established a church and cemetery and a community outside of Capote. Andrea Roberts explained that freedom colonies that former enslaved people created protected not only themselves, their lives, but the memory of their lives as they built new communities. When people migrate, as the formerly enslaved did from Texas to California, they brought with them their ideas and their experiences, bringing cowboy culture right along with them. From building communities to actually literally building Texas, Dr. Tara Dudley showed us how the built environment of Austin was shaped from enslaved skilled tradesmen and artisans who were architects, woodworkers, stoneworkers, plasterworkers. She revealed the beautiful signature of Samuel, who created what looks like a Flemish bond brick pattern in limestone, an image I won't forget. Taken together, we understand that the evidence of the lives and work of enslaved people are present in all types of traditional archives and paper trails, that archivists now are working to change their practices so that all of these stories around us that are deeply embedded in the archive are legible and visible to everyone. But the lives and work of enslaved people are also all around us. They're in the structures that they built that still stand. They're in the legacies of health that we just heard about. They're in the monuments that protected the institution of slavery, monuments like historic plantation homes, and yes, the Alamo. We are trying to grapple with and explain those historic sites and how we might think about them differently in the future. They are also evident in the laws and practices and customs, and in what Annette Gordon Reed called the chief legacy of slavery, white supremacy. To understand Texas, she said, you have to understand the racial history of the state, the hierarchies that that racial history put in place, and the root of that history in slavery. I hope that you have seen that here in the last 2 days. And this afternoon, I hope with SACAM's help, you find new ways to put that understanding into action. Thank you. Back to a little bit of business. Also the cruise director here today. We need to flip this stage, which will take us about 10 minutes, possibly. So let's take another 10-minute break. And when we come back, we will have a super stellar Q&A panel that will allow for more access to the scholars who have been here and for all of your questions. Thank you.